listening to the Straight to Video podcast with Rob Lane.
Welcome along to my podcast, Straight to Video. This is episode 183. We're knocking on the door of 200 episodes since we started back in the summer of 2020. And I want to say a massive thanks to everyone that's been along since the beginning and a big hello to newer listeners. I truly hope you're enjoying these conversations and you may be learning about some new music, new films, or revisiting some old favorites, because that's what I wanted to bring when I started this show. Let people tell their stories and hopefully spark some nostalgia from you, the listener. Today's chat is a great example of that, as I got to speak with blues rock renegade Jack J Hutchinson. I hadn't met Jack before, but he was such a great guest and made things really easy for me. He's an awesome storyteller, and it's a big bonus that he's a huge horror and sci-fi fan, as well as loving John Carpenter films, so how could it fail? Earlier this year, Jack released his latest album, The Hammer Falls, but he already has a brand new EP, What Doesn't Kill You, scheduled for later in the year. We discuss all of that before we get onto the good fun 80s and 90s movie chat, which I know you're gonna love. If you like everything you hear, then a lot more of what Jack is up to can be found at jackjhutchinsonmusic.com, and please make sure to follow and support him all over social media too. You will learn from our chat what a great hard-working DIY musician he is, so I know your support will mean the world. Before our chat, I'm going to send my usual shout out to the folk at Dead Skull Coffee. I'm hoping to meet up with them at the Call of the Wild Festival next week at Lincolnshire Showground, as they're sponsoring the event, which I know is going to be amazing. Dead Skull Coffee have been long-time supporters of this show and deliver the finest ground or full bean rock and roll coffee you're likely to find here in the UK. Plus, if you place an order through their website, deadskullcoffee.co.uk, and add the promo code STV on checkout, you will receive a massive 15% off your order. Alright, let's do this. I really enjoyed today's chat with one of the UK's hottest rock talents, and I'm sure you'll become a fan too after listening, so let's dive into my straight to video chat with Jack J Hutchinson.
Hey man, how you doing?
I'm good, Jack. How's things?
Not too bad.
Where are you now? Are you down in London?
I actually live in St Albans, so I'm kind of just north of London. I used to live in Camden. That was a fun 5 years. So this is quite different to Camden, but yeah, I do enjoy it around here. It's a bit posher, so God knows why I'm here.
I want to get into some of your journey to where you are today, because from what I've dived into, there seems to be quite a few twists and turns. But first up, you're hot on the heels of your album, The Hammer Falls, and some live dates earlier this year. But you've already got a brand new EP scheduled for later this year with some more live shows. And the new EP, this impresses me, has been mixed by Kevin Shirley. For those who don't know, as one of the most impressive rock CVs out there, working with like Maiden, Silverchair, Aerosmith, Joe Bonamassa, and I believe one of your favourites, the Black Crowes. How did you two hook up?
Yeah, man. I mean, obviously, Kevin Shirley has been a producer that's probably worked on some of my favourite records, going back to probably around the time when the Black Crowes worked with Jimmy Page back in the late 90s. And that was one of the first records I ever bought, was the Live at Greek album, which is absolutely fantastic. I used to jam along with that loads, and then became a big Iron Maiden fan. So then it sort of like coincided with him working with Maiden.
Kept seeing this name on the credits, Kevin Shirley.
Yeah, absolutely. And so to be able to work with him, was absolutely fantastic. And it was kind of done quite quickly last year when we headed back out on the road in October, which was the first tour we'd done for 2 years almost. Yeah, I kind of got chatting to Kevin via email, and he lives over in Australia, so it was all done remotely. We headed into a studio the day before we went on tour, and we did a track the day before we headed out on the road. So that was quite cool because it gave us a bit of a boost as we went into those first shows. And then you send him the track, and you're like, oh God, I hope he likes it. But he sent me this nice message and said that he dug the track. Yeah, there's 4 songs on the EP. We'll do the full announcement next month. But yeah, really excited about it. I think it sounds great.
Was there much back and forth, like figuring each other out on like what he envisioned the track to sound like and what you had in your head, or was it just like hand it to him and let him do his thing? Not going to argue with that, CV.
Oh, absolutely. It was very much here you go and you do your thing. Yeah, and then he sent the mixes through, and we got them mastered probably about 4 or 5 weeks ago. So it's quite recent really that this has come together. So yeah, it just sounds great. For me, it sounds like a band playing in a room together. You know, there's a lot of rock records where, for better or worse, they don't necessarily sound like that. I guess a lot of contemporary rock sounds like very polished sort of radio sound, which I dig that as well. But this very much sounds like a band playing together, because that's how we recorded it. Yeah, really pleased with it.
How's it feel to like have a calendar building up for 2022 with things that look like they're actually going to happen?
Yeah, well, you know, a lot of what was happening sort of the turn of last year, we were planning stuff over the summer and we were definitely nervous about it happening. So we were very pleased that we managed to pull off both of the recent tours, and we didn't have to pull any shows. You know, there was a big fear that one of us would get COVID or something would happen. Considering the chaos that's ensued on most of my tours over the last 15 years, you know, it's like, who would have anticipated this would have been something to possibly pull things? But yeah, we got loads of dates this year. And then going into next year, I've just been working on some dates over in Switzerland. Very exciting. And, it's exciting to book it and think, yeah, it's going to happen.
I saw a post on your Facebook where, what was it? So many years since you did a whole tour in your car. There's a picture of you with your old car. And you had, not just you, but you had the whole band and the gear in the car.
Yeah, man. I mean, we were chatting just off air, weren't we, prior to the interview that, saying what I've done over the bank holiday weekend. I've actually been looking for vans. So yeah, I've sorted out a tour van for later this year, which I'm sure my band will be very happy about. But yeah, the first time that we did a tour together, yeah, we toured Spain in a Renault Clio.
That's morale building.
Didn't feel morale building at the time.
It's not meant to.
Yeah. The funniest thing about it was that my drummer took with him a miniature drum kit. So this drum kit looked like a full-scale drum kit, but when you sort of moved to the side, it was like as thin as like an A4 sheet of paper. And it's a bit like, that final scene in Indiana Jones and The Last Crusade where he looks at the kind of walkway across the cavernous drop and then there's actually a path there. It's a bit like that with Felipe's drum kit. So yeah, we got a lot of people taking the mickey out of us on that run of dates, but a lot of fun.
So good. And did I see, are you doing NAMM in June?
Yeah, I'm heading over. I've never been to NAMM actually previously. So I'm doing a couple of acoustic shows, which should be a lot of fun, all solo stuff. But yeah, I'm looking forward to it. I mean, I've obviously followed NAMM for years, and you kind of watch a lot of videos on YouTube. A lot of my kind of guitar heroes presenting new gear over there. So I'm looking forward to it. It's a bit different this year because it's taking place in the summer period rather than in January. So hopefully I'll be going back next year for the one in January. But yeah, really excited about it.
Have you spent much time in America, either just as a tourist or any performing opportunities come up in the past?
Not really. I mean, I've been over there previously because outside of the music, I'm an artist as well. So I've been over there doing gallery trips and that kind of thing. But I've never been over there with kind of my musician's hat on. But yeah, I'm really excited about it. And, considering everything we've been through over the last couple of years, just to be able to go abroad is going to be quite an experience, really, just to get on a flight.
Have you had much feedback from America? 'Cause, I mean, your music's very blues based and obviously there's so much blues history over there. Has much word come back from any music fans?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting when you look at the kind of analytics for stuff like Spotify and YouTube and where I get a lot of the views and listeners from. I get a lot from America. And so maybe my music does kind of channel something that is that kind of, I guess we've already mentioned it, like the Black Crowes have been a big influence on me. Bands like Blackberry Smoke. It's tricky to try and do that music actually as a northerner from Burnley. Used to live in North London, now lives in St Albans. It ain't really as authentic as Blackberry Smoke, is it? But you can allow those influences to seep into your songwriting. The worst thing is it would be if I was trying to sing with an American accent, because I can't stand that sort of thing. So you can allow the southern rock to kind of seep in and the blues stuff, but have that kind of northern authenticity.
You can give it another slant to it, different subject matter.
Blackberry Smoke meets the Stone Roses. I'm pretty sure nobody's ever asked for that, but that's what they get with my music.
Love it. You mentioned then you're originally from Burnley. Are your family from Leicester originally? Did you move at some point to Lancashire, or what was the time frame on all that?
Yeah, my mum's from, most of my family from Leicestershire. They're all Leicester fans. But yeah, when I was about, I guess 4 or 5, we moved to Burnley. So I spent most of my childhood there. My dad's from Yorkshire. He's from, he lived in a variety of places. It's a bit of a mix actually in terms of where I've lived, but I think that's probably a good thing. It's given me quite a few different life experiences and that sort of thing.
Before music came along, what was the young Jack Hutchinson into? You mentioned football in the past, and I know you love your movies. Was that the kind of thing you're enjoying?
Yeah, I think actually My mum, I saw my mum at the weekend, actually. She knows far more about vehicles than me. So I took her with me to try and find a van. So she's just completely clued up on it. I'm too busy just doing my hair in the mirror. Yeah, when we were kids, my mum was pretty lax and both my parents were pretty liberal in terms of what we were allowed to watch and things like that. And I remember watching a hell of a lot of sort of sci-fi movies when I was probably 9 or 10. And so I was forming these kind of clubs at school that would be like the James Cameron Aliens Club and things like that, which I'm pretty sure, a lot of my mates' parents were horrified by. But I think a lot of that held me in good stead for forming bands, because it's essentially a band is a gang, I didn't form a sort of gang that was getting into, bad things. It was basically just guys that would come round to my house on the weekend, and we watched like Aliens, Terminator, Predator, Total Recall, those sorts of things. So, I think a lot of lads my generation were probably into those films. So
you didn't have make membership cards or anything for Aliens Club, did you?
Yeah, I did. I made membership cards and everything. Yeah. I got bollocked actually because I wrecked my friend's cycling helmet. It was the prototype, and I taped a tape recorder to the side of it and spray painted it and basically recorded all the dialogue from Aliens so he could listen to it whilst we traipsed around the forest near our house. And it was a mix mash between Aliens and Predator, I guess. But yeah, I'm doing the same sort of thing now really with my band. It's just, 25 years later.
Who was your favourite out of Aliens in the Marines?
Oh, it had to be Hicks. Whenever we played it, I was Hicks. With the big heart sprayed on my kind of cardboard Marines outfit that I'd made.
Mate, you went full ball with all that then.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I'm not quite sure. I never went as far as building a full-scale power loader, but I was quite into the other stuff, Building the guns was pretty easy.
Because you're a big John Carpenter fan as well, right? For those who are unfamiliar, John Carpenter's responsible for films like Halloween and The Thing, and also composes the music for his films. What was your introduction to his stuff?
Well, again, probably inappropriately watching Halloween when I was about 9 or 10. And I think it was probably on like BBC Two really late at night. That was really horrifying. And I was really scared by that film. And I didn't go in the garden at my house for a couple of weeks because I kept seeing or thinking I was seeing sort of, legs behind the bushes at the far end of the garden.
When mum hangs the washing out, oh shit.
Oh yeah, exactly. Yeah. That film was so shocking. But then it kind of probably ingrained in me this sort of interest in that genre. And also the music. I found the music was so powerful. I think that John Carpenter's music has definitely influenced my music. I think a lot of the riffs that I've done, they don't sound like John Carpenter riffs, but like Big Trouble in Little China, that was a massive film for me when I was a kid. And there's a few riffs on my new album, The Hammer Falls. There's a track on there called The Raven's Crow, which is basically a reworking of the Big Trouble in Little China riff. But, I don't put synthesizers on it, and you add a pog pedal or whatever onto the guitar and it sounds slightly different. But hopefully John Carpenter's not going to sue me or anything like that.
No, I think that's a fair enough, just a tip of the hat.
Yeah, absolutely, man.
Are you a fan of his synth albums?
Yeah, I've got this kind of like collection of John Carpenter vinyls because one of the things I really liked was his last record. He did this sort of split coloured vinyl, which actually made me decide to do that for my record. So he released this song called Skeleton. It had this kind of really cool like black and white vinyl effects on it. So I just basically ripped that off and did it for my Call of the Wild single. So not just the films, not just the music, it's actually the look of his vinyl as well.
What do you think's an overlooked John Carpenter film?
Do you know what? I quite like Escape from LA. I think there's a lot of people slag that film off. But when we were in lockdown, I sort of binge watched a lot of Carpenter films, and I've got them all on Blu-ray, and God knows how many times I've watched them. But I didn't own that. I didn't have it. Probably because I watched it when it came out and thought it was poor comparison to the original. But I think it's all right. It's basically a remake of the original. The problem with it is it's got that kind of mid-90s terrible CGI, which I think ruins it for a lot of people.
So many films suffer from when they were made in that time period. It's unreal. It's such a shame, really.
Well, it's a bit like when you listen to music from the sort of turn of the century, where everybody started trying to use Pro Tools and trying to fix vocals, using auto-tune on voices, when the technology was pretty good, but it couldn't fix it to the degree where it's unnoticeable. And I think you get that a little bit with sort of particularly late 90s films. Like one of the worst examples is like The Mummy films, where it's just CGI in every shot. and it just looks horrific. But you watch something like Terminator 2, which came out in, was it 1991? They had to use it sparingly because it was new technology, and it still holds up and still looks authentic, I think.
It's like the Star Wars prequels where nothing is real.
Well, I remember going to see because just before The Phantom Menace came out, they re-released the original trilogy, didn't they? And obviously tinkered with them. And I went to a midnight screening of, I think it was Empire Strikes Back. And I was like, this doesn't look the same. What's gone on here? And then it'd be like somebody going back to Led Zeppelin's Physical Graffiti and auto-tuning Robert Plant's vocals. It's just like sacrilegious. It is what it is. And I've got those on DVD. I've got those versions. So now I'm more accustomed to the CGI fest than the original.
What was your local cinema when you were growing up in Burnley?
We didn't even have one, actually. And when I was a teenager, they built a cinema in Burnley, and it was a cinema and bowling alley. And it was like, oh my God, like we've actually got a cinema. Although the bowling alley already existed, actually, but the cinema, when it opened, and I remember like the opening weekend going to see Con Air with all my mates. And that was like the year of Nicolas Cage's, like, I think Face Off came out just afterwards. Some brilliant films. And so we queued up, and the queue went right down the street because it was like, God, we've got something to do in Burnley on a Saturday afternoon. But yeah, lots of trips to that cinema.
Was you a big video store kid as well then?
Yeah. Well, that was the thing with getting Terminator 2. I remember getting that video when we went to Blockbuster, me and my mum, on a Friday evening, and convincing her it was a child-friendly film.
You've also quoted some lines from Almost Famous, the guitarist with Mystique, in some of the interviews. Is that a film that's up there for you?
Yeah, man. I didn't actually see it when it first came out because I'd seen a lot of those sort of rock films and just thought they were always terribly done. But then I probably only saw it about 10 years ago and then was really hooked on it. And I never realized there was an extended edition of it. So I got the extended version on Blu-ray when we were in lockdown. Yeah, it's funny because me and my band, I do quote that film a lot. We had a moment on the last tour where, due to all the kind of rescheduling of stuff, we had like all these dates. I mean, that tour plan looked like something. It was like a tin of spaghetti. It was all over the place. So the final day was in Inverness. I think the date before that we played Bedford. So it was like quite a drive. So we actually came home after the Bedford gig and we had to go up to Inverness. You know, we were looking at the logistics of how we're going to get all the way to Inverness. And it was a weekend where there was a big storm, I seem to remember. And this is the most diva moment I've ever done in a band. I basically sent all the guys up in the van. And I booked myself a flight. I was like, do you know what? I can't be arsed with this. I'm going to just fly up. You know, woke up in my own bed in St. Albans, and then Luton Airport's about 15 minutes away. Went and got the flight up, took about an hour. And then the guys picked me up from the airport. They'd sort of driven for 12 hours or whatever it was overnight. To say they were annoyed was a bit of an understatement. I was like, how are you doing, guys? You ready for the gig? And I think they were all just like, yeah, we're ready to go home now, man. But the moment with that was like, I always think about the bit where he gets left behind at the service station in Almost Famous, and he's like, you know, I'm only the lead singer. There's moments like that on tour where I think, you know, I am I'm the guy from Almost Famous. I've got my haircut like him.
You're Jeff Beebe, aren't you?
That's it, man, yeah.
Have you ever been left at a service station? Because it's a regular occurrence for lead singers to be left when they go to the toilet. This
is not painting a good picture of me, but I have left a band member at a service station because I usually do the driving.
Oh, right. You're the one who leaves them.
I used to play in this sort of little blues acoustic trio, which was really how I kind of started with all this, really, in the second wave of me being involved with music. So this is probably about 6 years ago. We had a gig over in Norwich, and this was the beginnings of the touring with the Clio, actually. And I got in the Clio, drove over to Norwich. We'd managed to get a double bass in there. I don't know how I managed that. The car was probably highly illegal, what we were doing, but, you know, looking back, very, very silly. But it was kind of like we stopped at services, everybody piled out, got their Costa coffees, got back in. I just drove off, chatting away to the double bass player in the front. And then Danny turned around, this big geezer called Danny Rock, an absolute legend.
Real name?
Well, of course his real name, yeah. He's actually Italian. So if you look at the spelling of his name, it's not as you would expect. But Danny turns around and he's like, where the hell's Tom? We'd driven up the A, whatever it is, over to Norwich. We got about 5 miles up the road, and I was like, I thought he got in. So we had to come off the dual carriageway. We had to loop all the way around. And then we got back to services, and my harp player who's from New Jersey, he's just like, you bastard, man. And I said, you know, I'm really sorry about that, man. So what he'd done was as we were getting in, he'd opened the door and he'd taken some rubbish out, slammed the door and walked off to put the rubbish in the bin. And I just assumed he'd got in and driven off. And so he didn't let me forget that for a very long time.
You mentioned him earlier when we were talking about Kevin Shirley, but one of your biggest influences is Led Zeppelin, who I believe you got into in like the late 90s, and when you was given a Led Zeppelin box set. I remember that coming out, like that big, huge like box set with the cornfields on it. What was it that clicked for you? Because I find that interesting, and perhaps where we fall out, because I've never got Led Zeppelin. I can't deny like they're a legendary band, but I always put it down to you had to be there. But if you got hooked in the 90s, I'm interested into what the magic was for you.
I remember reading an interview with John Squire, who at that point had formed a band called the Seahorses. It was an interview, I think, in Guitar Techniques magazine or something like that, Guitarist magazine, where they was talking about Jimmy Page, and they framed it within the interview of it being kind of seriously uncool to like Led Zeppelin. And Led Zeppelin had really fallen out of the public eye, I think, at that point. They were not seen as a, talking probably like 96, 97, they were not seen as a cool band to be into. Just found it quite intriguing what was said in the interview. So I kind of checked out Zepp, and then a fella called Andy Booker, he was the manager of my first band. And, my band at that point probably just sounded like a horrific knockoff of Stone Roses meets Ocean Colour Scene or something like that, like everybody did in sort of 96, 97.
It was a funny time.
It was a funny time for music. A lot of guitar bands in the charts, which everyone talks about as this mythical period as being great, but actually a lot of it was pretty bad. But Andy had the Cornfields Led Zeppelin box set. He had it as a 4 CD thing, and he lent it to me, and he said, listen to this track, Heartbreaker, put it on. I was just absolutely blown away by that riff and the rawness of it, actually, in comparison to what you were hearing on the radio. It felt like a bit of a punch in the face. And I was actually quite interested in the visuals of that box set as well. It was really weird and kind of intriguing in the same way that you kind of get into, horror or sci-fi, that same feeling of what the hell's going on here. I found it quite suspenseful music, listening to Dazed and Confused. Dazed and Confused sounded like a horror movie soundtrack to me. The violin bow elements. And I was doing my GCSEs, I was doing my art GCSEs, and the sundial that's on the cover of one of the CDs, it's got Zoso on it, it's the Jimmy Page kind of design. I basically copied that for my GCSEs. So the visuals were as important. I remember for my 18th birthday, my mum got me Song Remains the Same on VHS, so this is how long ago it was. I'd been on a trip to London with my art group, got back, and basically this girl that I really liked had copped off with one of my mates on the way back from London. I was really upset, and so my mum gave me a present early, so I got in and I put this thing on, and I'd have to say it was unlike anything I'd ever seen before. And I always think that the first time you listen to a record is really important, which is why I don't really listen to stuff digitally a lot of the time, because I like that experience of that moment of the first time you hear something. And actually, when I watched Song Remains the Same, it was a little bit like watching on BBC Two Halloween or Psycho or whatever at midnight, with all the lights out, doing it naughtily, and watching Song Remains the Same and thinking, what the hell is this? And I remember going to school the next day and I was just banging on about Led Zeppelin to all my mates. I'd had about 4 hours sleep, and I was just like, there's this bit where he's like Gandalf on top of the mountain. You switch the TV on that Friday night and it was like Oasis doing Wonderwall. So the contrast between...
in the Fred Perry shirts. And
Yeah, it was so different. It just got me really hooked on it.
That's kind of interesting, because like just reverting back to what I was saying, like I've never got Zeppelin, and I always say like, oh, you had to be there. It was a time where it was like nothing like you'd seen before, but I guess that's what it was for you. It was like nothing that was happening at the time, and it was like, holy shit, what is this hitting me round the side of the head compared to everything I'm hearing on the radio?
I think they do polarize, though, don't they, Led Zeppelin? I know a lot of people that don't like him. My bass player hates AC/DC, and I don't get that. I mean, I'm a massive AC/DC fan. AC/DC are kind of like my band that I stick on. If I'm feeling a bit low and I want to be cheered up, I'll stick a bit of Bon Scott on, and it immediately puts a smile on my face. And he doesn't get it at all. He's just like, it just does nothing for me. And so, you've just got to accept that certain music, people just don't like it, Obviously, I listen to certain elements of Zeppelin, and I think there's fair play. They did some crap. Like, it's not like everything they did was brilliant, but I think the same can be said of every band.
But that was your doorway to older blues artists, seeing the names listed. Probably, was it like as song credits on like live stuff? And you trace the family tree back from there. That must have been quite exciting to like, oh, what magic can I dig up?
Yeah, I mean, what it did was it unlocked a lot of bands for me. You know, getting into bands like Free, I suppose, was a band that I got into after that. Humble Pie were a big band for me as well for a little while. Blowing out my voice, trying to sing like Steve Marriott for a bit, never quite achieving it. And then I think it was recognizing that blues music was the root of a lot of this really great music that I was into, all the 70s stuff that I was into. And then the Rolling Stones were a big band for me. And so they were probably out of all of those bands, the most explicit in terms of having a blues band structure. And a lot of their early stuff is essentially just blues music.
Your dad was a big Stones fan, right?
Yeah, man. He kind of burnt into my memory a lot of those tunes because he had the Unplugged album, actually. I remember he had that in the car, and we used to listen to Wild Horses. Like, Wild Horses was one of his favorite tracks. And so that was a song that when I was first putting a band together, I was like, we've got to do Wild Horses. Guns N' Roses had done a version of it as well. And so I was, I kind of modeled myself on Slash. I was going to say for a little bit, I'd probably still do that for a little, in terms of the stage stuff. But the Rolling Stones, yeah, I think what interested me about it was taking the blues and taking those structures and kind of twisting them and taking them in a different direction. And I've always got a lot of respect for, people like, obviously Muddy Waters, a big influence. But I was asked to cover a Muddy Waters song at a concert a few years ago. It was up at the Liverpool Philharmonic, and it was a recreation of the band's Last Waltz. So different artists were asked to kind of perform certain songs. And the song that I was asked to do was Muddy Waters. And I just was like, I can't do Muddy Waters. I can't sell that, See, I think you've got to be a bit careful in terms of those blues roots. I used to run a blues jam at Ain't Nothing But Blues Bar in Soho. When I used to run this jam down there, you'd get all these guys coming in with their shades on. Actually, as soon as somebody walked in with the shades on, I thought he's going to be shit. You'd be like, trying to get up there and play B.B. King or Muddy Waters or, Elmore James or whoever it might be. And it's just so inauthentic. And then they get up and do Stevie Ray Vaughan, and it's the worst thing you've ever heard. So I think it's like, you got to be kind of a bit careful with the blues stuff.
Like you said earlier, though, you can't put on an American accent. You've got to be authentic. You've got to channel your love of the blues, but put your own stamp on it.
Yeah, I think there's still a blues influence even on the latest album. I've had people kind of question why I moved away from the blues. In my head, I didn't really move away from it. I just write songs, The first track on my album, Straight to Hell, is actually a shuffle. It's based on some of the stuff from the first Fleetwood Mac album, which is Peter Green. You stick a load of distortion on the guitars, raise the tempo slightly. It's actually a blues song with a kind of melodic kind of Ozzy Osbourne chorus, but the rest of it's a fucking blues song. And so people are like, oh, you've left the blues, but it's like, well, no, it's there. You just have to listen a little bit more.
You could just probably strip it down to an acoustic and just do the same song.
Yeah, I mean, I tried to do that, actually. It sounded absolutely terrible. So I won't be doing that. But yeah, it's still there. And it's kind of, there's a lot of magic in blues music that I think has resonated across decades and decades of contemporary culture and music.
You mentioned tracing older blues artists back. Obviously, this was pre-Spotify. So where was you finding all the music? Was it Astonishing Sounds in Burnley?
It was, yeah. Astonishing Sounds. Do you know what? I went into Astonishing Sounds a couple of years back. Well, I'd say a couple of years. It must be probably 10 years ago. I went in with my brother. They'd got my first EP still in stock. And I was like, amazingly, this CD has not sold in 10 years.
How crushing is that?
But we hadn't made it to the bargain bin yet.
Yeah, what's worse, finding it's still on sale in a record shop or seeing it in a charity shop? I've seen that on some of mine. It's like, oh, shit.
God, my brother bought it. I was like, oh, thanks. Because I didn't have the masters for that record. So I was like, I actually need a copy of this. But yeah, I used to go down there. That was my thing after school, actually, would be to go down there and just sift through records and pick out stuff that I couldn't really afford. Although vinyl around that time was actually quite dirt cheap to buy. So I amassed quite a big vinyl collection. And then, of course, 10 years later, all that stuff's going for like 50 quid because people suddenly decided it was cool.
Do they carry any Jack J Hutchinson albums now?
I don't know. Do you know what? I'm due to go back to Burnley. I got married last month, so I saw a lot of my old friends. We were on about having a few nights out in Burnley. So sanctuary, here I come. It could be messy.
Yeah, you got to get in touch with the record shop and give them a heads up. Say, look, I can bring you some vinyl up. Get your picture out front.
When we did the album release for the last record, we did a run of kind of record store performances. It would have been quite cool to do a Astonishing Sounds, but it's kind of whether they'd have me or not. I love going back to Burnley, and it does. It's quite nice to go back and see all my old mates, and a lot of them were musicians that I played with back in the day, but most of them haven't continued down that route. They've all got sensible jobs, and they work for like the BBC and things like that now. It's all got very serious, whereas I'm still keeping the dream alive, pretending I'm in Almost Famous.
Could you see a future in music as a career back then? Because you've mentioned it already. You do artwork as well, and I think you've done journalism in the past as well, both of which you've studied. Was that what led you to London initially? Yeah,
one of the best pieces of advice that I ever received was when I was at art college. I went to art college in Lancaster, and I was told that in order to be successful at any of those careers, you need to diversify and have a portfolio career. And I didn't really understand what a portfolio career meant, but actually that's how I've managed to keep going for 20 years, is that I've got different activities that I do. I've worked for periods doing, illustration for, advertising companies, that kind of thing. But it's all been creative outlets that I've really enjoyed. And, there's a period where I focused on drawing for 2 years. I was in quite a few exhibitions that were well received, which was pretty cool.
Your artwork looks stunning though. Where's that style from?
A lot of it, I think, came from the same place as when I used to practice guitar, which was that I've always had OCD. I've had obsessive compulsive disorder, and that came through really when I was a teenager in terms of practicing guitar, and probably drove my parents mad through the kind of obsessiveness of playing one line and playing it for 6 hours and trying to perfect it. And I'm not kidding, it would be with a metronome speeding up to this insufferable pace, and then them having to listen to this crap through the ceiling. But then my drawing is the same sort of thing. So it's all obsessive mark making. And so I never really talk about it that much in terms of music interviews, but I am really interested in it. I still make drawings, and it's a different part of my brain that gets engaged with it. And it's a really different experience to walking on stage and, with a Marshall stack behind you making an absolute racket.
What are you more nervous about, displaying artwork or bringing a new song out?
Displaying artwork, I write songs, and it's almost like if somebody likes it, that's fair enough. But actually a lot of songs I write, for me, I actually write songs in a way that's like it's trying to get some energy or emotion out, but also it's a way of trying to deal with a lot of kind of negative stuff and turn it into a positive, whatever. I try and write stuff that I'd want to listen to. So there's a different level of stress involved. But with drawings, there's something really weird about it, where the last show I did, it was at this kind of converted warehouse down in South London. Lots of trendy artists there that were, far more articulate than me at the private view when they were speaking to collectors and stuff. And a guy came and looked at my work, and he just went, "Do you know what, man? This does nothing for me." And I was like, God, that was so brutal. If somebody slags off my music, I couldn't really give a crap because there's enough people that like it and I like it. So whatever. But that really hurt me. And I don't know why. But one day I'll find out. But it's just a different thing, but it's still creative.
Once you got on like this current path, what you're doing your original material, you've like built this great sound and, dare I say, brand for yourself. It seems to have been like a really productive few years and fast moving through the Boom Boom Brotherhood and the RHR projects to where we are today. How much have you changed as a person in these last few years? Have you changed a lot?
I think so, yeah. I've probably been on the road, as it were, apart from the pandemic break, although I was very busy during the pandemic, for about 7 years now, I reckon. About 7 years since I formed the Boom Boom Brotherhood. There's moments where it's quite stressful. I think that there's a lot of bands that were on the scene when I started out that are no longer there. I think a lot of bands usually last about 2 to 3 years, and then they realize that all their hopes and dreams are going to be dashed and they're not going to be the next Metallica, and then just call it quits. Whereas I've never really had any expectations for all of this. As I say, I've kind of just written songs that I believe in, and I've written them really for myself. And so, yeah, I'm really pleased with how things have gone. The hardest part for me is when bands kind of dissolve. Although I'm the kind of constant and I'm always writing and making my own records, I think I found when the Boom Boom Brotherhood broke up quite hard. We'd been a kind of band of mates for almost 3 years, and then that ended. And then RHR was about 2 years, and then that ended. And I've been with my current lineup, Laz and Felipe, for 4 years, which is the longest I've ever been in a band. And I think there's almost like a point where people move on because they have other projects that they want to do. So I'm very fortunate that we've been together for such a long time. You actually learn, I think, to be a little bit tougher about stuff and actually just think, well, the one constant is going to be me. I'm going to be be the person that writes the music and then have as good a time as possible, because the music industry is a really tough place. You know, the way that I've put together the financing for my last couple of records has been, you know, people see the sort of tour side of stuff, which is really cool, and playing the shows, but that's kind of the end product of all of the rest of it, which is kind of fun, like the fundraising element of it and doing kind of Kickstarter campaigns and self-funding records. And I'd much rather kind of be in control in that respect, because I spent a lot of time doing the other side of stuff where you're tied to labels in that way. And actually, that was what caused me to give up music originally. So that's why I kind of spent 3 or 4 years focusing on the art, because I just ended up really burnt by the industry. And then when I came back to it, I wanted to be in control. And so I am in control of my own music, which is quite a nice place to be.
Even though it's a lot of hard work, do you feel like you enjoy the whole process?
I do. And, you know, sure, my wife Liz would testify that when I'm sort of up at 1 a.m. sending emails, trying to, you know, work stuff out, I do enjoy it. I mean, you got to kind of be aware that it costs money to make records. And so that was one of the strangest things about the pandemic, was that without the touring income, I had to work out ways of funding it. So with the Hammer Falls, which we did a Kickstarter for, like, I'll be forever grateful for all those people that backed that project and that helped raise the money to pay for it, because without them, there would have been no album. So yeah, I don't know, man. I'm not really answering your question in terms of how I've grown as a person, am I? But I think I have grown as a person.
You got thicker skin.
Yeah, maybe. I've amazingly still got all my hair.
People are like, he's wearing a hat all the time. Is it still there? We can vouch, it's still there.
I've got the hair filter on Zoom. Yeah.
Just to wrap things up with a movie-related thing, and you probably answered it a bit earlier on, but after a show or tour, what's your favourite comfort movie to come back to, other than Escape from LA? Is it a John Carpenter film, or do you have another go-to?
Do you know what? I do tend to watch a lot of John Carpenter, or I'll watch some Hammer horror movies or something like that. I think what it does, it takes me back to that double bill of horror that they used to have on a Friday night. Was it called Dr. Terror's House of Horrors or something on BBC? And they'd have a double bill of stuff that would be, you know, a mix of kind of 1950s classic horror. It was the first time I actually saw Psycho. So for whatever reason, I like to watch horror movies when I come home or whatever, or I'm in a hotel room watching something on my iPad. In lockdown, I'd sort of steered away from it, but I got into the Conjuring movies. I thought those were great, and they were actually quite scary. So yeah, a bit of horror. I definitely don't come home or go to a hotel room and want to watch music documentaries. It's, in fact, your life is that documentary, so you don't really want to watch any more of it.
Jack, thank you ever so much, mate. I've loved chatting with you. I could go down some rabbit holes with other movie stuff, but we'll have to save that for a part 2 at some point.
Absolutely, dude. Thank you very much for having me on.
A great time was had talking to Jack J Hutchinson on today's Straight to Video podcast. I hope you all enjoyed listening, and we'll go support Jack over on his website, jackjhutchinsonmusic.com, or follow him on social media. The album The Hammer Falls is out now, and be sure to check live dates on his website to see when he's playing near you later this year. This and all other episodes of the podcast can be found over at stvpod.com, where you'll also see some straight-to-video music, videos and merchandise. And as you know, I'm excited to hit that huge episode 200 in just a month or two. Who would you like to see on that episode? Please let me know who you think would be a good guest, and I'll try my very best to make that happen. So that is all for today's show. I've had a great time, and I hope you have too. So till we do it again, take care and speak soon.